everyone. Thanks for coming today. How's the sound? Is that loud enough? Okay, great. Thank you for coming to the reading today with the Wisconsin Poet Laureate, Kimberly Blaeser. I'm Jill Stukenberg. I'm an assistant professor of English here. I teach creative writing and English courses, and it's my pleasure to tell you just a couple things before we hear from Kimberly. First of all, I guess I would like to thank the Lecture in Fine Arts series for hosting this. That's the program here on campus that brings us all these fine arts events. There is, at the back of the room, there's a small donation jar for this series. And additionally, I'd like to point out that the Wisconsin Academy of Arts and Sciences is the organization that now funds the Poet Laureate each year, since our public government no longer does so. So there's also some envelopes up here if you feel like you'd like to donate some money. These envelopes go right to that organization, and in particular to the Poetry Commission, who support the work of the Poet Laureate every year, including the modest, very modest travel stipend that helps the Poet Laureate travel all around the state and do their work every year. And I can tell you more about both of those things if you have questions. And I also want to let you know that, some of you came to the Poetry Recitation Challenge last night, so thanks. That was really fun. Today will be different, of course, because we'll be hearing Kimberly read from her own work. And in addition, she has another appearance tomorrow at the Woodson Art Museum. And at the Woodson Art Museum, that event will also be different because she's giving a workshop from 10 to 4. I believe there's maybe one space left in the workshop if you're still interested. And her workshop has to do with picto poems, combining photography and photography and poetry, and there's sort of an example up here that she brought. But so tomorrow we'll focus more on that, the workshop. And additionally then, tomorrow night at the Woodson from 5 to 6, she's reading/presenting. I suppose you have to read and present picto poems. But so that event will additionally be different. So all different events, nothing overlapping in content. You can have a full week of poetry, as some of you have been so far with our Poetry Week here. So with those events announced, I'd like to tell you just a little bit more about Kimberly. She's the current Wisconsin Poet Laureate, poet, photographer, and scholar. Kimberly Blaeser has been zigzagging the state, traveling from the thumb of Door County to the southern wrist cities and everywhere in between. Anishinaabe, an enrolled member of the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe, Blaeser grew up on White Earth Reservation in northwestern Minnesota. She's the author of 3 poetry collections, Apprenticed to Justice, Absentee Indians and Other Poems, and Trailing You. She's also the editor of Stories Migrating Home, a collection of Anishinaabe prose and traces in blood, bone, and stone, contemporary Ojibwe poetry. Her poetry is widely anthologized and has been translated into several languages, including Spanish, Norwegian, Indonesian, French, and as of just this week, Hungarian. A professor at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Kim teaches creative writing, Native American literature, and American nature writing. And her current creative project features picto poems and brings her nature and wildlife photography together with poetry. She lives in the woods and wetlands of rural Lyons Township and spends part of each year at a water access cabin in the BWCA chasing poems, photos, and river otters, and sometimes all at once. So please help me welcome Kimberly Blaeser.
Good afternoon. How is this sound for you? Okay. If I start popping my peas, tell me, because that's something that irritates me. So I have to get organized. I'll do my bending as I read. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity to spend time with you here. And last night was an interesting event. The inaugural event of the Recitation Challenge. And I forgot, but I will leave a few flyers about that as well. If you weren't able to attend and would like to participate, you can videotape one another and submit to an online site where there will be a committee looking at and hopefully posting these various recitations on a map of Wisconsin, an interactive map. I did want to say how wonderful it has been to be traveling the state of Wisconsin and to find these pockets of poets and artists and other people engaged in the arts all around the state. And it is sad to know that our state is at the very bottom of arts funding. So that's why we need you to all advocate for the arts. And you know how important they have been to you because you're sitting in this room. I know how important they have been to me because I believe in some ways I survived because of hearing the voices of other writers and artists and just, following that path in the world. And so I know that there's less funding for arts in school. I know there's less funding in general, but as the funds shrink, I think our community just has to get stronger. So I'm glad that you're here today. I thought I would introduce myself by way of a poem. And I'm also excited that there are some students here who have read and studied some of the poems. I'm going to try to throw a few of those in for the reading today. But my latest book is called Apprenticed to Justice, and there is a poem in there that's laid out a little bit like a family tree. And so I'd like to introduce myself by way of poetry. Family tree. A boxer grandfather who once fought Star Bad Boy, who sired 6 beer-drinking German sons, all with the same big hands. The grandmother I never knew, who might be responsible for the heft of my thighs, is for certain the origin of my father's sauerkraut and fine venison sausage, perhaps for his sweet tooth, and maybe mine too. My father who turned those boxer hands to percussion and gesture, tapping and clapping and snapping the quick-step songs, but buttercupping the fingertips to croon on bended knee the long-drawn Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa, men have loved you. My Chippewa grandmother, who was a midwife and medicine gatherer, tiny twig of a woman who bore 12 children, bore the loss of 2 babies to influenza, the loss of 1 grown son to white man's war, and the loss of a generation, limbo Indians turned to alcohol. My Indian grandpa, who squints darkly into cameras of the past, who raised 2 generations on rocky bottom allotted land, 28 slow horse miles from the village store, his crinkled story eyes, my first memory at 2. My mother, born of dawn, in a reckless moon of miscegenation, whose foot rode the pedals on 50 years of Singer sewing machines, her needles dancing rituals on a ribbon shirt, blending our jagged, mismatched edges in a crazy quilt. 2 uncles who ran away from Pipestone Indian boarding school, and an auntie who stayed, who lost her fingers, saw them caught, mangled in the laundry press, who beaded, kneaded, quilted, and braided her way through 4 children, just the same. Houses and fish camps full of cousins who rotated authority on marbles, sex, and skunk etiquette, whose probation blues and 49 songs deprived me of bee stings, broken bones, swimmer's itch, drunken despair, and suicide, in whose tangled litters, blonde and black-haired softball players, I fearlessly set down my suckling babies. My great-grandfather Niwan, Miniwanagos, lover of natural things, whose Antel heart I am said to bear, who carried his name with humbleness, as I try to, and sometimes with rage, fire brown eyes sharp as any weapon, who cupped his hands around fertile seeds, brown fingers, the pine cone, shelled house of protection, all my relations. So my family is much larger than that, but that's a sampling of those people who have, with whom I inhabit this world. I feel like we become the people and places of our past, right? And we see out that lens of our own personal and communal and tribal and whatever other kind of history that we have. And we see out of the lens of place as well. So I wanted to also read a poem. My poetry sort of is a little bit eclectic in the sense that it doesn't focus singly on a certain sort of strain of ideas or even forms, but it wanders around, and just as we encounter different things in the world, we react to them with our art. And this particular poem has an interesting life. It's about the strength of women, and I grew up among very strong women. And I feel oftentimes when cultures have been in great distress, it is the women that helped with survival. And I was invited to go to Indonesia some time ago, and it was for this Utan Kayu Festival. It's an international artist festival, and they had gathered work from us, and they put together an anthology, and then we were traveling different places in Indonesia. And one place we stopped, there was an exhibit, an art exhibit, and I had not realized that they gave the collection that they put together to Indonesian artists who then created works of art on whatever work they found that intrigued them. And so we all went into this gallery looking for the piece in case there was one that had to do with our work. And I found this stunningly beautiful acrylic painting, huge painting by a really well-known Indonesian artist. And many people were like, okay, here's my $500, and they took home their piece of art. But I was poor and she was too well known, so it's out there in the world with someone who was wealthy enough to collect it. But I always felt that I liked this poem somewhat better. I'm really having trouble with my piece today, guys, because it had this other life, and I know that it's out there somewhere also living another life. On the piece, on the painting itself is a stanza of the poem in Indonesian. So I read this for all the strong women in my life and all the wonderful women who are sitting here today. Fantasies of women. They say there was an old woman who lived in a shoe. Children spanking bed, no food. It's an old story. One to rival the Peter tale, who kept his wife in a pumpkin shell, or Jack Sprat, who coveted all the 90% lean cuts of meat, while his ever-expanding, squat, round wife tumbles over the sides of a tiny kitchen chair, overfilling the page on which she is drawn. We keep turning the page, but one caricature follows another. Some claim women always were the delicate sex, fainting, timid, helpless souls, you know that line. The length and breadth of those whose names have scrambled the letters of femininity into unrecognizable derivations. Annie Oakley, Gloria Steinem, Wilma Mankiller, Rigoberto Manchu, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. In pants or full veil, in every state of dress or undress, Cher's navel, the jewel on Cleopatra's forehead, burn like all beacons of dissent. I heard, a nation is never defeated until the hearts of its women are trampled upon the earth. This one, I believe, for I grew up among women who could swallow a raw heart, whole or in infinitesimal pieces, deer heart, rabbit heart, turtle heart, and did chew and swallow, swallow and chew their own red hearts, beating for survival, for survival, for survival, for survival. And this is the single story we write with our lives. Women of travoy, ox, or minivan, of African brown barefoot toes, bound Asian feet, or $75 a pop Birkenstocks. Together, we walk our houses of history, track true the paths of indentured servants, girl babies slain and buried, this black dirt of bias exposed, overcome in story cycles of scarlet fecundity, told through the fires of many tongues, and translated again in the labor of women. Now we sing. There was a young woman who lived in a shoe-obsessed, commercialized, overstocked world. She had many children and knew just what to do, raise them, to share the burdens of all the people, to unearth the fantastic lies we were taught to walk upon, to devour fear, chew and swallow, and to cast their hearts for survival. Thank you very much. One more poem that kind of exposes another sort of reach of my poetry. I am someone who is very much in love with the natural world. I feel like it defines me in many ways, and it inhabits me, and I don't really know how to explain that. In many times, I disappear into places and come out better on the other side. And this is a particular poem that was written for one of my fine colleagues at UW-Milwaukee who passed away, Bill Harold. And Bill Harold was the ultimate poetry teacher. His students absolutely loved him. And he had this marvelous interest in all things. Like you could talk to him about anything, and he would know fascinating details. And he also was quirky in the way that I hope I become quirky as I get older, or maybe I am now, ask my students. But a student came rushing into my classroom and said, "Professor Harold said there are angels in the elevator." And I said, "Well, maybe there are." What are you going to say to that? But a couple of just small things to know before I read the poem. It mentions crickets, and Bill Harold had a physical challenge that made him stiff, and he often stood like this. And in my weird little mind, I kept seeing cricket, how the cricket has that little leg up like that. So that's what the cricket started out doing in the poem. But also I wanted to say that the speed at which a cricket chirps changes with the temperature. So you can actually tell temperature by how fast a cricket chirps. And I do mention Boundary Waters, which is the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northeastern Minnesota. And I'm also, have been for many years fascinated with refraction, reflection, and that sort of, if you've ever been here in northern Wisconsin, if you go on some of the lakes at a certain time of the morning or evening, the light is of such a quality that you literally cannot tell what's real and what's reflection. Have you been out during those times? And I honestly, I feel like it's just this, it's like a mystery. It's like a miracle to be there in those moments. And so this is called Refractions. Why should it happen that the smallest zigzagging black cricket, one stick leg raised, a musician's baton, holds and then releases the same song as my canoe paddle slicing into glass? Boundary Waters evening lake, still mirroring like memory doubles, you here and gone, now leaning akimbo, a cricket musician, message encoded in meter, in the rhythm of my own arms, paddling side to side, as if I could find you in the funnel of each stroke, in the blue sluice of time. And light grabs my breath again, peering into that one space where ledge rock dissolves into color, cascades gray and rust and moss green, effortlessly transforming at water's edge, tumbling headlong into repetition, unfolding mirror image into the depthless eternity of reflection, until in that moment I forget which side of vision is mere reality, and that this bent black line of insect can sing, and more, that every chirp should count in precise degrees, just how cold is loss. Thank you. Thank you. And that is a poem that is featured in a picto poem that I've done. If those of you who decide to come tomorrow, I'll have some of the, they'll have the visuals there as well as, and although I won't be reading them all, I'll flip through and you can see some of them. Let me think. Where is she? Marjorie? Not if that's, am I getting that right? Marjorie? I think it was, I said I would read the title poem from Trailing You. Now, this is my first book, and I was telling some of the students last night that many of these poems came out fairly, earlier than they should have. So those of you who are writers, don't finish something and just throw it out there immediately. Hold on to it. Put it away in a drawer, let it set. You know how wine has to age and other sorts of things, cheese in Wisconsin. Some of my poems have entered the published world a little too early. And so when I read some of my older poems, I get a little cringy. But at the same time, I read, say, Joy Harjo's work, her first book, and I love it. So we are at different places and different eras in our life. And this poem, though, is not one that makes me cringe, so I'm happy to read it. And I kind of want to say something about it, and I kind of don't. So I think I'll just read it, but I read it for my Uncle Ike. Trailing You. Trailing you in stories, and then in the dreams that come just before morning, so that I wake listening for you to finish what you were saying, or I sit up swinging my legs to the side of the bed, rushing until my feet feel the carpet, and the rest of what I was expecting becomes a dream too. Those mornings, I won't talk until I go over it all slowly the way I remember it. Waking up because my nose is so cold and the fire has gone out in the bedroom stove. Lying under the crazy quilt, peeking out of the blankets that cover the window to see who is out in the yard, what kind of day it is, what's hanging on the clothesline. Feeling the last warmth of the flannel sheets before I swing my legs out and my bare feet touch, not carpet, but ice-cold linoleum covered with bits of gritty sand that stick to my feet as I run into the kitchen where a fire is going in the cook stove where you have been sitting drinking coffee. Sometimes I see your face when you turn. Other times, it won't come clear, but I refuse to look at the pictures. I want you more real than that, not to cry over as if you aren't still here. If I could tell you the things I'm doing, bring them to you over smoked fish and coffee, you'd make them over for me with your talk and teasing, link with your eyes, my past and present. So I trail you, waking and sleeping, hear you laughing when you splash cold water on my face when I've slept too long, see your hands and hear the water trickle into the wash basin as you pour for me, smell the side pork and hot biscuits, listen to you call, Kimmadil, Kimmadil, as if I were a bird. And in these memories and dreams and stories of you, I find the places you sat and rested while cutting wood. I see the hole you broke in the ice when you fell through, and the path of broken ice as you kept heaving yourself up over and over with your gun ahead of you all the way to the shore. And I wonder if these poems are a path I make, and I wonder how far it is to shore. Thank you. I wanted to do a couple of new poems as well, and then I'm going to sort of take requests if there's one that you want to hear. I traveled to the Kingdom of Bahrain the October before the Arab Spring, and long story made very short is that I met Bahraini writers, and they were very much on fire with what they felt needed to be changed in their country. We all know how things burst all over the world, and we couldn't watch them all at once, but in the Kingdom of Bahrain, a young 21-year-old poet was arrested, tortured, and imprisoned for reading her poetry out loud because they said it would incite revolution. And we recently heard, if you haven't Googled this, a Saudi Arabia poet who was first condemned to death based on his poetry, and then there was an outcry around the world, and now that sentence has been reduced to 8 years in prison, and get this, 800 lashes. Will 800 lashes kill you? More than likely. So please find petitions for supporting free speech for poets around the world, artists around the world. And this is a poem that just comes out of my experience in Bahrain, and it's called Unlawful Assembly. Don't hurry to safety. Each hour your flowered room grows smaller. Everywhere at the periphery of vision, windows shatter into triangles of mosaic light. There, in the lonely fragments, a YouTube dictator declares victory. Blood flattens and darkens. The scent of rebellion, smoke, fire, and ash, all pungent in the still images sacrificed to history. Somewhere the flapping door of an overturned wagon thumps steadily in a deserted street, echoes, absent hands. Thank you. Another fairly new poem, or fairly recent poem, is a poem that I wrote as I was trying to come to terms with the many people in my life that I had lost in a seeming rapid sequence. And I know that, it is part of life to somehow deal with loss and death. And this particular poem tries in its own way to make some sense of loss. And it's called Afterwards. Because the smallness of our being is our only greatness. Because one night I was in a room listening until only one heart beat. Because in these last years I've worn and nearly worn out my black funeral shoes. Because the gesture of afterwards means the same thing, no matter who speaks them. Because faith, belief, forever are only words, no matter. Because matter disappears always and eventually. Because action is not matter, but energy that's spent changes being. And if death too is a change of being, perhaps action counts. And if death is a land of unknowing, perhaps we do well to live with uncertainty. And if death is a forested land, it would be good to learn trees. And if death is a kingdom, it would be good to practice service. And if death is a foreign state, we should loosen allegiance to this one. And if the soul leaves the body, then we must rehearse goodbye. Thank you. I feel I should do something lighthearted. Okay, I'm going to try here. There were a couple of very short poems that I wrote years apart that always seemed like bookends to me. And one of them was called Living History. And then this is the second one, if I can just find it. It's called This Guy Back Home. And I must admit that these were written years ago, so I was a much younger woman at that time. This is called This Guy Back Home. Always the last fish house left on the lake. Day he pulls it out, the ice breaks up. He's that kind, the one all the old ladies want, to take to bingo, and not just for his luck. He's the kind, can make everyone laugh, can sing Indian songs, can wear his hair long, swaying as he shadow boxes the county sheriff. Watch that one, my uncle says, and I say, yes. Okay, I'm going to read the poem that is featured on this wonderful broadside, and I'm going to grab it. So one of the things that I was able to do as Poet Laureate was to work with a paper maker and a letterpress printer to create this broadside. And this paper is gorgeous. It's made. I'm not a paper maker. I'm just like, isn't this lovely? And I have an idea. Let's do it. But someone else. In my next life, I'll learn how to do that. But it's made out of cattail and cotton. Even if you can't buy one, you should come up and feel it. It's very cool, and you can feel the letterpress printing on here, and it's in a couple different inks. And it was so much fun. I actually got to turn the machine, and I had such joy doing that. But this is a poem that those of us who are used to northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, and know about the wild rice will relate to. And it's called Menomen Ike Gizis. Ricing moon, when poling arms groan like autumn winds through white pine, old rhythms find the hands, bend and pound the rice, rice kernels falling onto wooden ribs, canoe bottoms filling with memories. New moccasins dance the rice, huffs of spirit wind lift and carry the chaff, blown like tired histories from birch bark winnowing baskets. Now numbered by pounds, seasons, or generations, lean slivers of parched grain settle brown and rich, tasting of northern lakes, of centuries. How am I doing for time, Jill? Oh, I'm good yet, right? I think so. Okay, I'm going to then read another newish poem. Well, I say new, but these are uncollected poems. This is not actually that new. It's been in a journal. I should say that if you are interested in my work, there will be a new art book coming out this spring that features picture poems, ekphrastic poetry, and some straight poetry. And it's small, but I'm really excited about it. Okay, so this particular poem, I thought I'd read it because it's kind of it's not the poem on that picture poem, but it's a related poem. It kind of comes from that same journey, and I could talk about those if you want, or I'm for certain going to talk about those tomorrow. But this is a poem called On Climbing Petroglyphs. And we're more familiar here with pictographs, the rock art, but in the Southwest they have more petroglyphs. Okay. 1. Nearly 12 with size 7 feet, dangling beside mine off the rock ledger domain of self-knowledge. How do I say anything? Magic words you might need to hear. With flute playing, green painted nails, your child's fingers reach to span the range of caramel-colored women in our past. Innocently, you hold those ghost hands, each story a truce we've made with loss. How can I tell you there were others? Big-boned women who will try to push out hips in your runner's body. Women who will betray you for men, a bottle, or because they love you, and don't want to see you disappointed in life, so will hold you hostage with words tangled around courage, duty, or money. When should I show you my own flesh, cut and scarred on the barbs of belonging and love's oldest language? 2. No, let us dangle here, dawdle for an amber moment while note shimmers sweetly captured in turquoise flute songs, the score of a past we mark together. No words whispered yet beyond those painted, untainted rock images of ancients, sun, bird, hunter, spirit lines that copper us to an infinity, endurance, your dangling, mine, before the floor of our becoming. Perhaps even poets must learn silence, that innocence, that space before speaking. Thank you. It occurs to me, I'd like to do a slightly, well, actually, let me do this poem. Earlier this year in January, you may or may not know, there was some threat in Wisconsin to the effigy mounds, the native mounds that Wisconsin is noted for. We have more native mounds than any other state. And there was a bill proposed that was a threat to those, and I can give you more information about that, but I'm a part of a small group of activist poets, and so we did this. There was a huge gathering in Madison where people could speak out about this and also bring some information to the attention of our legislators, and we also had a mounds action in Milwaukee at the lakefront by one of our mounds there. And it happened to be the coldest day we've had this year. It was an evening event. And I was there in all my fish house gear. You know, I'm like, I wasn't going to freeze. So I was there in all my ice fishing gear. And we had a group poem that we had written. I wrote a poem. One of my colleagues, Meg Newton, wrote a song. We did an education thing. We did a dance. We performed. And then another colleague of mine, Lane Hall, you may have seen some of his work. He does the Overpass Light Brigade, where he has these letters. Each placard is a letter, and then they're lighted, and they spell out different messages. In this instance, we spelled out sacred land, sacred site. We spelled out sacred site, and Mequenin, which is remember in Anishinaabe Moin. But I thought I'd share with you, I did a couple of poems, but the one that I'll share is the one that I actually wrote for that Mounds event. And I use an epigraph from Alison Hedge Koch's volume called Blood Run, which is all about earthen effigy mounds. And the quote is, "Our wealth abounds within what we preserve. Our wealth abounds within what we preserve." Tribal Mound Earth Sutra. We remain wealthy beyond measure, the past, ancient treasure we protect. What power resides in earthen mounds, ancestors, wisdom of clan relatives, astrological continuities, portal to spiritual realities. Effigy of bird, panther, rabbit, bear, the hungry rise of earth imbued with sacred life. Monument, transcendent force, name this site holy. Stand with me here, a fragile human thread, Earth Sutra, this curved land and ageless link, we, a small vibration, one song among the many. Sing this song now, my heritage, yours, shape in consecrated breath, words that mean belong, honor, courage, praise, believe, protect. Transform with me here, become in this sanctuary, rich in memory, humble before mystery. Open the medicine pouch of your voice, stand firm together, defend this treasure. Yes, we remain. Thank you. And if you were to go to the Wisconsin Poet Laureate Facebook page, you can see images from that event as well. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is take a couple of what would you like. Some students who have read things would like me to read certain poems. I'm happy to do that, and then take a couple questions, and then close with a poem that I've selected. Yes? Apprenticed to Justice. Just happens to be my closing poem. Can you hold for that one? Sure. Okay, so any other requests? There is one there.
Columbine?
What is it? Louder.
Columbine.
Columbine. Which book is it in?
Apprenticed to Justice.
Okay. Is it Red Lake? I think.
Oh, yeah, Red Lake, sorry.
Okay. So this, with all of the different school shootings, there was a school shooting at Red Lake Reservation during George W. Bush's presidency, and he was preoccupied and couldn't acknowledge that this terrible thing had happened for several days. And it irritated me that this tragedy in a native place was not recognized in the same way that every other shooting had been acknowledged and people reached out and so on. So this one expresses a little of my ire at the time, and it's called Red Lake. When bullets sink into the flesh of children, color still matters. After Columbine left tattered white middle-class dreams of immunity, parents across this country grieved en masse. Blood pumped faster in the crisp white shirts of politicians, and flag-waving citizens of every ilk mourned and rallied for change. Columbine, melancholy ballad, O Columbinus, in old school Latin you are the flower dove. Columba turned hawk, gunbeaks and black flak jackets, your name beneath full-page photo spreads, a chant, metaphor, purple call for change, Columbine. But even death has a pecking order. And the president of a nation built on soil soaked with the blood of conquest hesitates when he speaks of sympathy for the hapless young who died in this, a reservation tragedy. Add these children to the anonymous red dead of the native nations of this America, a 21st century America who cannot waste its breath to chant the funeral song for these fallen, an America who speaks this name, Red Lake, like an ethnic slur. Red Lake, Nagamo, Red Lake. Red Lake, Miquendam, Red Lake. Any other requests? And I'm not sure, should I close and then ask questions? Does that sound good? Okay, yes, I think we are. Okay, so then we did this recitation challenge last night. I think that I can recite this poem, a title poem for Apprenticed to Justice. And so I'm going to try to do that. I'll have this book here in case I have to quickly look at it. But a couple of things about this. There's a very specific reference for Wisconsin here. Some of you are alive who remember the white buffalo calf, and I allude to that here. And there are historical allusions to scorched earth campaigns, to the Trail of Tears. There are also some allusions to art like birch bark biting, which is this wonderful Anishinaabe art. And I guess that this poem came to be through a teaching moment. I was in the classroom, I was teaching, I was talking about Joe Bruchac, who is an Abenaki writer and performer, storyteller, very well known, and actually has traveled Wisconsin widely. He's often here with the Library Association and does a lot of work in the schools. And I was talking about him to my students, and I was describing the way that he was raised. And I was saying he was raised by his grandparents, he was tutored in, and then I said, I guess you could say he was apprenticed to justice. And this book in general talks about the way that we are apprenticed to many things. You know, in a Native community, you don't just automatically become. One day you're a storyteller, one day you're a medicine person. You have to actually learn, just as we all do, but in a somewhat more formal way, that you have to apprentice yourself to people in the community before you take on these roles. And then I thought to myself about the way that we are all apprenticed to many things in our lives, and that as we go along, it's a process, it's a journey in which we learn more and more. And so I think in this book, there's a couple different sections, or I think maybe 4 or 5 sections, and it focuses on the way we're apprenticed to family, to nature, to story, to history. So that's sort of the frame idea in this whole book. And then in this last section, it really is about being apprenticed to justice. And that is the title of the poem. The weight of ashes from burned out camps, lodges smolder in fire, animal hides wither, their mythic images shrinking, pulling in on themselves. All incinerated fragments of breath, bone, and basket rest heavy, sink deep like wintering frogs, and no Dust Bowl wind can lift this history of loss. Now fertilized by generations, ashes upon ashes, this old earth erupts. Medicine voices rise like mists, white buffalo memories, teeth marks on birch bark, forgotten forms tremble into wholeness. And the gray, weathered stumps, trees and treaties cut down, trampled for wealth, flat potlatch plateaus of ghost forest raked by bears soften, rot inward, until tiny arrows of green sprout, rise erect, root fed from each crumbling center. Some will never laugh as easily, will hide knives silver as fish in their boots, hoard names as if they could be stolen as easily as land, will paper their walls with maps and broken promises, scar their flesh with this badge heavy as ashes. And this is a poem for those apprenticed from birth. In the womb of your mother nation, heartbeats sound like drums, drums like thunder, thunder like 12,000 walking, then 10,000, then 8. Walking away from stolen homes, from burned out camps, from relatives fallen as they walked, then crawled, then fell. This is the woodpecker sound of an old retreat. It becomes an echo, an accounting to be reconciled. This is the sound of trees falling in the woods when they are heard. The sound of red nations falling when they are remembered. This is the sound we hear when fist meets flesh, when bullets pop against chests, when memories rattle hollow in stomachs. And we turn this sound over and over again until it becomes fertile ground from which we will build new nations upon the ashes of our ancestors, until it becomes the rattle of a new revolution, these fingers drumming on keys. Miigwech. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions, comments. Anybody? Yes, Ms. Chen. Mm-hmm.
Just as you're reading, I noticed that many of the poems, the family tree poem, the fantasies of women, the one refractions, trailing you, those, it seemed like a lot of your poems are like both sort of mix like the mode of elegy and ode. I was wondering if you could say like how you see those two things relating, or do you think about that when you're writing?
No, I don't think about it when I'm writing, but, there is someone, and I'm just going to try to grab his name really quickly, who's actually written about that very thing, and you would love to read his work, because he talks about, in general, that Native poetry is doing something different. Dean Rader, L-A-D, it's either R-A-D-E-R, or R-A-D-A-R. I think it's R-A-D-E-R. And he has written a couple of articles really, really fascinating about that. And he talks about particular poets like Joy Harjo, Simon Ortiz, and he has actually also edited like a collection of Native prose poems and so on. But I think you're actually onto something because, and in fact, you should write about this. Because I've written an essay, if you want to kind of get my sense of Native poetry, I wrote this, it was actually like 100-some page essay, so it's really a book-length essay about Native poetry. It's in the Columbia Guide to Native Literature of the 20th Century. It has some big, long name, but the Columbia Guide to Native Literature. And I kind of talk about form, I talk about intent, I talk about just a lot of things and specific poets. But I think that idea of it not being whole and part of something we recognize, but bringing a couple things together might really be true. And in other ways too, and I'd love to have a longer conversation. Suddenly the lights are giving you a halo. I don't know, are you a saint or? Okay, all right. Any other thoughts or questions? Or I really can't see well, but I think there's one there. Suddenly the light is really strong.
Hi. Your poem from Trailing
Yes,
Places where poems live. Is that about your husband?
it is indeed. And can I tell you something funny? So I'm trying to get him, so he is not in any way a poet, but obviously he's had to, live with me for a very long time. And I want him to participate in the recitation challenge, and that's the poem that he wants to do. Isn't that cool? Did you want me to read that? Do I have time to read that? Okay. Which book is it in?
Trailing you.
So, where is it? Oh, thank you so much. Really, something weird just happened with the lights, so suddenly there's like little spots in front of my eyes. Okay. And I haven't read this for a million years. Although I remember that one of the blurbs from the back kind of references this poem, I think, by Diane Glancy. Who takes me places where poems live? Who says that poetry is difficult except for the sound which he can understand as music? Who wonders where the ideas come from that write themselves into lines late at night while he sits watch? Who'd rather read a newspaper than a novel because he hasn't a taste for stories? Who, when we chase the day about in rain, returning cold and hungry, carries back soggy sounds and images, drying them out with me before a fire, as if they weren't the very fabric of story? Who tells me what the news is and what the names of things are and how the world got to be the way we wish together it wasn't? Who draws me maps I can follow and reassures me into and out of cities? Who takes me to swamps and ponds and streams and creeks and lakes and all places of water where words begin, to mountains, moraines, and palisades, such places of height where vision is born, to forests and meadows and gardens and thickets, to company with growing things, to ditches, kettles, valleys, gorges, and canyons, each low-lying place where thoughts grow deeply, to homes of caribou, otter, moose, and shrews, ducks, cranes, eagles, jays, and loons, where all voices sound. Who takes me to weddings and funerals and family reunions where the weak draw patterns and the brave relationships, to libraries and bookstores and Chinese restaurants, to board meetings and back doctors, into the rush and into the hush on boats and bikes, planes, trains, wagons, and skis. Who says he doesn't see how this leaves time for poetry at all, as if all this were not the very stuff itself, as if he weren't he who takes me places where poems live. Thank you. Thank you for asking for that. Thank you for asking for that. I haven't read that for a million years, and it makes me very happy. My husband and I celebrated our 30th anniversary this year. Woo! Any other requests? Okay, so now I'm going to, if you wanted to buy a book, if you would do it quickly, I could sign it for you. And please come back. I have to run to Milwaukee because we have the U.S. Poet Laureate, Juan Felipe Herrera, there tonight, and it's free. So you should come too. Drive 4 hours with me. And then I'll be back tomorrow. And so I'd love to have conversations then if you're available. Thank you so much.